there anything they need to share?
Well, I'll share with you, in preparation for this program, I did call the Cassifs and talk briefly to Bob, but more to Sue. And she said, I'm not getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning to try and get him on the Zoom, and he's very confused. And so anyway, it was kind of a nice chat. But they had a granddaughter got married last weekend.
Nice. Is that local or did they have to travel?
I'm sorry?
Was it local or did they have to?
No, I think it was local. I know their son from Andy was there. He lives in California. Two of their sons actually live in California. I know that Andy was there. He's the youngest of them.
Now, who is it you're talking about?
Cassifs.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, just wasn't sure. Yeah. Also wondering how Howard's doing.
I've communicated by email with them, and they seem to be doing fine. They are now getting the newsletters, but they have a meeting at the same time up there, so they are watching. What they said was they'll watch it, the replay, so to speak, down the road when they have time during the week or something like that. So they're really trying to do both meetings at the same time. I mean, on the same week, not at the same time.
Sounds good. All right. Why don't we turn it over to Bob for the program?
Turn it over to David first so I can bring it up.
All right.
Okay, I'll just kind of share some things. Can you all hear me very well?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just kind of share some things as I got ready to do this and looking at the program and thinking, well, it'd be kind of fun just to talk about Lake Sherwood, and it kind of expanded from that point to what I'm going to present to you. And some of the things that I found were, one of the things particular which I will share with you was really kind of shocking to me as something I was really never ever aware of. So anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about the late part of the 1800s and the early 1900s. So go to the next slide, David. Okay, first off, I think there were three important, as I call them, transportation modes that shaped the area. The oldest being the Overland Trail, the second being Lackland Road, and I'm going to talk about each of these, and then the third was the Midland Creek-Core streetcar line. These three things came through the area, and there was a lot of development that happened along all of those lines. The Lackland Road, well, anyway, let's go to the next slide and we'll get into that. The Overland Trail is actually about 2,000 miles long, and it goes from St. Louis in through St. Charles to Oregon, all the way out to Oregon. Travel time was anywhere from 4 to 6 months on. The Overland Trail marker we have here, well, I should say, first off, the trail existed from about 1830 until the Civil War, and as people were moving west. The marker at Lackland and Walton was the site of the Overland Park stop, which was 12 miles, was the 12-mile inn. Now that's 12 miles from downtown St. Louis. That was the first day's travel. So they stopped there and spent overnight. Afterwards, the actual trail really went through what is now, if any of you know where Burton Avenue is in St. John, it's actually between north of St. Charles Rock Road, about probably 3 or 4 blocks. And that was the site that the trail went through from once it left Lackland, the Lackland Walton area. Next one, David. So there's a site of the 12-mile inn. And it talks about a popular spot for water and shelter. But then there's another interesting thing stating there that in 1863, General Sherman actually bivouacked there, and he camped in the area. The inn was eventually destroyed by fire, so there's no remnants. Now this marker and the Overland Trail marker are at Lackland and Walton. Next one, David. So here's a copy. Here's the Overland Trail that shows where it goes from leaving St. Louis. And when it left Overland area, it actually went to the Boonslick Trail. It went through St. Charles, and then from that point on, I don't know what the name of the trail was. Now you'll see other trails that are there too, but in addition to that, there were trails that went from the southwest part of the country up into California and Oregon in those years also. Go to the next one. Now, this is how they traveled. Look at that. They got. How would you like to spend 4 to 6 months on that that wagon getting out there, and what's your life going to be like once you get there? Plus, that looks like pretty desolate country. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the Midland Creve Coeur line. It was begun in 1899, and it started from what was called the Delmar Gardens Loop, and went from there to Creve Coeur Lake. If you'll notice that lake that's kind of up in the upper center part of the map, that's Creve Coeur Lake, and that orange line, David, that comes down, that's the Creve Coeur streetcar line. Now, if you go over to the next orange line, that's the line that came down St. Charles Rock Road that actually went out to the bridge to St. Charles. At one point, there were 450 miles of streetcar lines in the St. Louis area. I have a feeling that had we kept those streetcar lines, I think it would have made we would not have had such exodus from the city of St. Louis that we had. We'd had transportation in place, but that happened in the late 40s, early 50s. The transportation industry and the coal, gasoline, and rubber wanted to get rid of streetcars, so you'd have buses consuming those products. Now, the Creve Coeur line operated for about 50 years, and it started until 1950. Now, originally, if you look at, I make the comment there, the weekends, that there were as many as 25,000 people who were at the Creve Coeur amusement park, which is, if those of you who have been out there, you'll note that there's still a brick building that was the turnaround for the streetcars. And that was a great amusement area. And by the time, then the street, and I don't know what the date was, but the streetcar line that quit going to Creve Coeur, it actually stopped and went just past Ashby Road. It's what they called the Crow's Nest. And there was a turnaround at the Crow's Nest, which is just west of Ashby. And that's what the streetcars ran on for the years that I remember. Go to the next slide. Now, these were the streetcars that came along the Midland line. Those are, the one on the left are much older, and the one on the right. And I can remember both of those as a kid. They finally put this more prevalent ones. If you look at that 1641, it's in pretty bad shape. It's kind of banged up, if you notice that. But that was very impactful. There were a lot of things that happened along the Creve Coeur streetcar lines. The Midland Valley Golf Course was one of them. You had the Goki property, Goki Estates up to on Goki Avenue. A lot of that happened along the railroad line. Okay, go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the beginning of this, Delmar Gardens. And I'm going to come back to some of this later as to why I put that in there. This was right at where the Delmar Loop is. It was a very large amusement park. There was another one called Suburban Gardens, which was actually up in Wellston. And this is where the people would go for their entertainment. This particular, you'll see the roller coaster and the railroad lines. Go on to the next slide. In addition to that, this was a large amusement park, but there was horse racing there with gambling. There were theater productions. There were opera, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Automobile racing. One of the races included Barney Oldfield. And so this was the terminus of the Olive streetcar line and the start of the Midland Creve Coeur Lake line. And that streetcar line actually came out Midland from Page, came across there, Midland and Page. And for many years, if you came across into Overland at Lackland and Walton, Midland was not extended there. You used to have to drive up east on Lackland to Gilrose and take a right turn on Gilrose to get up to what was the Midland, at that point, Midland, and then to go into Page and into the city. And I'll go to the next one. So let's talk a little bit about Lackland Road as its importance. It started out from the Kings Road. That was the road that was going to St. Charles, which is now St. Charles Rock Road. The road was later named Lackland, and it was either for Dennis Lackland or for his son Rufus. and I'll talk about Rufus a little bit more later. Dennis built his home, his country home, first as a log cabin in 1833. And then he constructed a home in 1844. And he constructed it in kind of a Maryland style because that's kind of where he came from to St. Louis. Lackland at that point in time, you have to follow it. It went from the Rock Road all the way to Fifi. Now, if you think about Lackland today, it goes to the point where it stops at Page. So they put Page through there, and then later they put Highway 270. So Lackland stops there. It then starts again just west of 270, and it then goes up to west of Lindbergh, and then it goes up and stops at 270. But previous to that time, it went all the way to Fifi. Fifi was a very important road that went kind of north and south in St. Louis County. Dennis Lackland and his wife are actually buried in the Fifi Cemetery, which is really, I think, on St. Charles Rock Road out, very similar, close to where and Brian probably knows this, close to the Missouri Baptist Children's Home. Or no, I guess it's up on Old St. Charles Rock Road in
Old St. Charles Rock Road in Fifi.
And Fifi. So Fifi wound its way through there. You know, Fifi was named for, I think, some French maid, Fifi. But, you know, I had my business actually on Fifi for about 10 years or 15 years. And we were part of Fifi in the industrial park in Westport. Okay. Go to the next one. So this is what's called the Lackland Baker Mansion. This is where Dennis built the house. This was the 1844 home. It's still occupied. After Dennis died, Rufus Lackland, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, he spent a lot of time there. These were their country homes. And then the home was sold to a Major Wallace Baker in 26, and that's how it got the name of the Lackland Baker home. I think Baker had to do a lot of work to bring it back to what it is. And I think it's still occupied, and that is right on Lackland. And you'll notice when I started doing this, I found these historic markers that the Overland Historical Society had. And that's one of the markers in front of the Baker home. And now that Baker home is just east of Ashby on the north side of Lackland. Okay. Now, Dennis Rufus' son Rufus, he enjoyed the home for his lifetime. He was a very large landowner. He had about 650 acres, some of which actually was just west and south of that home, and it kind of would have encompassed what I would consider along Page Avenue and to the south of there, all the way out probably to Lindbergh. Rufus was the president of Boatman's Bank, and he had interest in sugar, iron, railroads, and the original gas company. And he died in his early 90s, a very successful person. But that's part of the history of Lackland Road. Okay. Now let's go back to where I started with this thing with Lake Sherwood. Well, Lake Sherwood was really initially called Laughlin Lake. Henry Laughlin was a judge who purchased the property in 1879. He was a successful judge. He constructed the dam in that area. And it's actually, the lake is fed from 7 springs and is approximately 19 acres in size and 30 feet deep. It's one of the deepest lakes in Missouri, maybe. It's the headwaters for the River des Peres. And if you ever follow River des Peres, it goes from there, I think, through Ladue and ends up being, I think, underground through Forest Park, and then goes on into South St. Louis. You know, if you know River des Peres, there is a pretty open ditch. Henry later moved to Chicago, and he had a hotel that was very successful. There were a number of lawsuits between Henry and his family, and in the end of it, Henry ended up cutting out both of his sons from his will. The acreage he owned, which I'm going to show you in a minute, was quite extensive, much more than just what was the Lake Sherwood property. He laid out Sycamore Hills in the late 1890s, advertising home sites for sale. If you know about any of the area, and even along Lackland Road, there's an awful lot of sycamore trees that were planted, and that I think is how the whole area became known as Sycamore and Sycamore Hills. Go to the next slide. This is a picture of the lake. It's a beautiful lake. It's probably one of the nicer places in St. Louis County. And you'll also know that there were swim competitions that the Missouri Athletic Club came out and had national competitions at the swimming at the lake when I think that's when Henry owned it. Go to the next slide. Now I want to show you this. This is a plot. It's not a very good picture of it, but if you look at the top part of that, that's what's called Sycamore Hills. Tom, your house is on one of those lots up there. And if you note, the legal description of your property is really the Laughlin edition of Sycamore Hills. So it got its name from Henry Laughlin. The plotting you see to the left was originally done, but that was all going to be called Sycamore. Now that did not come about there. You'll note though, if you see Lackland Road and the Midland streetcar line, see where Dave's got that, that's Lackland Road. And then the streetcar line comes up there. Now you'll note to the right of that, the streetcar line has no road to it. So that's where I'm telling you where there was a break. Also kind of keep in mind that intersection because I'm going to come back and say some more about that. Go to the next slide. This is something interesting I found some years ago. This is an aerial view that was taken by Charles Lindbergh and found it on the internet. And this goes back to probably prior to him, of course, going the Spirit of St. Louis. And he flew airplanes out of Lambert Field for mail. And this is an early aerial photograph. You'll note down on the left-hand side, that's the lake. And the road that you see coming down through there, that's what is now called West Sherwood. And you'll see that which I want to get to later, that house that's there, that was the home that Randolph Laughlin built. Now, they'd go up and show that wooded area, point to your wooded area to up in that area, see that area, right? This is what really fascinated me. You'll see that house that's there on it. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, one thing I want to tell you about, which is kind of a sidelight, when you look at, there's nothing in these things about Brown Road coming through there. Well, Brown Road originally stopped at St. Charles Rock Road, and it was extended into actually to Woodson and Page. And in looking at some of these things in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, this was 1932, and the county was building roads extensions of Delmar and Forsyth and Brown Road. And what they did, because of the Depression, they actually hand shoveled all of the roadways before they poured the concrete. At one point on one of these roads, there were 330 men who would work three-day shifts, and they'd have one shift for 3 days, another shift for 3 days. And they were paying these people 30 cents an hour, $2.40 a day. But because of the Depression, they were giving work to people. Now that 30 cents an hour relates today to about $5.50 an hour. But that's how they help people getting through the Depression. Go to the next slide. Also on the property, there was a cabin, and then they called it the Daniel Boone's cabin. This was actually in the Lake Sherwood property. And it's kind of across from where Wyland School is today. But I can remember as a kid, there was a fence around that property, and maybe still is, but across that fence, you could see the remnants of that Daniel Boone's cabin that was there. And so it goes back to 1799, and it was a stopping place. Okay, go to the next one. Randolph Laughlin was the son of Henry Laughlin. It's a significance because he ended up acquiring the estate somewhere around the 1900s. Randolph Laughlin was a very successful attorney. If you go through the Post-Dispatch, there's all kinds of lawsuits and things that he represented people. He built the Rock House, which we showed you where that was on the map. It was a stone house. The stone either came from a church in St. Louis or what was remnants of the World's Fair. I don't know which is which, but the guy sold him the stone for $200 down in the city. The problem was, how do you get the stone and the stone out to the county? So he had a friend who could use the rail line, the streetcar line. So they loaded it on some cars and sent it out that way. It cost him $3,200 to get the stone delivered after he paid $200 for it. Construction of this house, and you can go to the next one, Dave. This is the home as it sits today. Isn't that a beautiful setting? It was built, like I say, in the early 1900s. There were many problems in building it. At one time, the construction people abandoned it. The boiler froze. There were many, many lawsuits from Laughlin against the contractors, and finally they settled it all. I think he must have lived in that home. And his son, Robert, I think it was Robert Laughlin, was involved in pictures. And at one point, in the basement of this house, he had a place where he was actually trying to do talking pictures. This is during the silent picture era. And this son actually had some things that they said worked pretty well to be a talking picture. Okay, go to the next one. Okay, here is my real surprise. This one just floored me when I got into this. Grace Quigley was an opera star. She was nationally known. She performed at the Delmar Gardens, and that's kind of why I put that Delmar Gardens in there, because this is significant to this story. This marker and property is just right across the street from the building that we had our business in and we owned on Lackland and Brown. And if you remember, I had Dave point out the property that was up there, kind of from what would be now Charlotte Avenue to the east, and I would think probably some distance to the east. This was Grace Quigley's property. She met and fell in love with Charles Van Studeford, and I think that happened because of Delmar Gardens. He was a wealthy businessman and owned racehorses, and she still had a great deal of affection for him. Go to the next slide. So Henry Laughlin, who owned the Laughlin Lake, challenged Grace that if she could swim across the lake, he would give her property to build her home. So what did Grace do? Fully clothed, she jumped into the lake, swam across it, and swam back. And Henry ended up giving her property. And I'll show you there that her property is on the north side of Lackland on the streetcar line. At one point, there was a Van Studeford stop on the Creve Coeur line, which would now be probably just about Brown Road, probably Brown Road. One of the homes built, and if you know, I mentioned the property, there was a home on that aerial photo at 8907 Sycamore. That original home is still there. I drove by it yesterday, and it's on Sycamore Court. Sycamore Court is just a little small street north of Lackland, running off of Brown Road. Charles, because of his racehorses and betting, he lost his wealth. He really went down. So Grace had to return to singing and to support him until finally they were divorced. Grace built a 7,000 square foot home for $25,000. Today's value would be about $700,000. It was called Atlasta Place. It burned in about 1918, leaving that one piece of property, home on the property. Grace declared bankruptcy in 1919 and later lived a very quiet life until her death. Now here is the shocking thing that shocked me and I want you to see. Next slide. This is Atlasta Place. Think about that. It was 120 feet wide, long and 60 feet deep. It was that big home. She had horses on it and garden grounds and everything else. And I mean, I'm sitting here flabbergasted to the fact that was there across the street. You know, at my age and spending all the years in our business and things there, had no clue that Atlasta Place was there. Okay. Let's go back to a little bit the ownership of Laughlin Lake and Lake Sherwood. In the late 20s, Clarence Howard, he was a very successful steel manufacturer on the east side, sold his business which became a General Steel plant, I think. And he bought the estate in about 1928. They called it Pine Acres. The Howards were Christian Scientists and very involved in the Christian Science church. At one time, this property was laid out and considered as to the site for Principia College. They decided against that, and so the Howard family donated $200,000 to purchase land for what is now the site of Principia in Elsa, Illinois. They donated land. Right at the corner, you know where the Norman Myers Park is. That is, when I was a kid, that was called Taylor Field. And Taylor Field is where Principia used to come out and play their high school football games. They were then on Page Avenue down in the city, but they would bring their football team out there to play. In addition to that, the church that's on the corner of Midland and Lackland was originally a Christian Science church. I know that is now an African-American congregation. Now that's the other end of that piece of property is where the Overland Christian Church of Christ is. Howard passed away in Boston in a Christian Science home. Those of you who have any knowledge of the scientists, they do not believe in medical, so they have homes of kind of convalescence homes, and this was the mother home in Boston where, Mary Baker Eddy was headed. Okay, let's go to the next one. Let's talk about his son, Clarence Howard Jr. The Pine Acres was what the Howards named the estate, and it was passed on to his son. Clarence Howard Jr., again, was successful. He was killed accidentally in 1944 when he stepped through an unprotected door at the Masonic Temple down on Lindell and plunged 10 feet to his death. In about that same time, I guess the family was wanting to sell it, the city of Overland had an election in 1944 to raise taxes to purchase the 100 acres for a park, and they were going to pay $125,000 for it. Two citizens, one being Percy Baldwin, which I'll get to a little bit later, and I can't remember the name of the other one, who lived right across the street from our store on Lackland. They went around telling the people that the tax increase was too much. And my father, I think, told me that it lost by about 6 votes. Norman Sherman then purchased the estate for $114,000 in 1945. Now you have to realize this estate at that point went the lake portion, and it came all the way up to Lackland and Brown, and it went all the way down Brown Avenue, Brown Road to where the Wyland School is, and then so that all those homes on Kenosha, Home Federal, all of that was part of the thing that Sherman purchased at that time. And then I don't know who developed the homes along the Brown Road. I know Sherman developed the homes on West Sherwood, because one of my friends actually grew up there. She was the daughter of Norman Sherman's building superintendent. Okay, next one. So then from that point, we have these markers. The first one I'm going to talk about is the Caleb Baldwin house. If you notice the building in behind there, that's the present, the old Ritter YMCA. Baldwin moved there and from New York in 1843. The family owned that property until it was sold to the YMCA. And his son Oscar, and then his son Percy, and Percy was one of them that went around complaining about the tax increases. This is another interesting thing that it says there were Indian burial grounds that were located just south of the property. That's kind of interesting, because that would have been South Milton, which is where I grew up, and I had never heard of anyone saying where there were burial grounds. I cannot find any history on the internet for that. Then we're going to talk about the Heidrich Fritz building, and that, if you think about that today, across from the City Hall on the northwest corner of Wooddale and Lackland, there's a building, the nice Columbus Zone. That was originally Heidrich Fritz building. It was a grocery store, and Heidrich later had a home that was right across the street that was torn down and owned. That's where the City Hall, where the Overland Recreation Center is now. And Heidrich also gave money to the St. Louis County Library. And for years, there was a branch of the St. Louis County Library that was in the basement of the present City Hall. And that was the money that came from Heidrich. Let's go to the next one. The next one then going west would be the Artman Funeral Home. This is interesting that it was built in 1905, and you notice from recycled materials from the World's Fair. And it also family by Charles Hamilton, but it was interesting too that it says it was still a dirt road at that point in time in 1904, 1905. The Artmans bought it in 1931. You'll probably look at that, Dave. You can show that main part of that building is the house that's still there, which is that's probably the original home that's still there. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, this is the site of Buck School. Now, this was a woman by the name of Smith. I think she donated the land to the school district, and they erected the first school there, the Buck School. It was a log cabin, destroyed in fire by 1882. They then built a new four-room schoolhouse. And probably, Dave, if you look at the center part of that, you can figure out this is where the 4 rooms were in here. And then there were additions put onto it later. So you figure out that building that the district is using goes back to 1882. Actually, that was where I went to elementary school from the 1st grade to 5th grade in that building. And then from there we went over, well, first off, we were in a Nazarene church basement for a year and then went to what was called the new Overland School, which is now the site of the post office. Okay, go to the next one. So this is the William Campbell home. If any of you are familiar with, as you go west on Lackland on the north side before you get to Sims, there's a big home there that was called the Campbell House. And it's still there. It was, I can remember that the Grossenbachers owned that home. And Henry Grossenbacher owned a company called Gross Air Manufacturing. They manufactured furnaces. And it was down on West Milton, just at Woodson. I think there was a sign company there or something at that point. And his daughter, I can remember years ago, his daughter actually lived in that home for years as a family. The next one is the Apple House. Now that's going to be up to the west side of Lackland, just next, there's a shopping center, there's some apartment projects and another piece of land. That was the property. It was a farmhouse that part of it was sold to, they say, Meadowbrook Country Club. Actually, the original country club was called Midland Valley, and that's where the development got its name, Midland Valley, with the Midland Valley Country Club. But I had a friend, Newman family, that lived in that house growing up there, the Apple House. It goes to the next one. Now, this is the site of the Lackland Avenue School, and it's actually where the Lions home is now. And it was a school that they built for Negro children in the area. Let's see, that's in 55 was begun there. So that's actually before Buck School was put in and the Rittner District. You have to realize that probably, I do know that up around Breckenridge in the American Legion ballpark, there was a settlement of African-American people, which actually were slaves that got land up in there. So there wasn't a contingent of probably slave families or remnants of slave families that lived in there. And they provided a school for them. And you'll notice that became the first high school for Negroes in the county. And it closed in 1915. And then you look to the right of there, that is the Elmwood School that the Rittner School District put in Elmwood. Again, it was an African-American community. And that's where the students at up to elementary school for years went to Elmwood. After elementary school, in later years, the only African-American high school in St. Louis County was Douglas, which was in the North Webster. So they were bused to Webster from around the county if they wanted to go to high school. And then we integrated in 1955, September 55, the students who lived in the Rittner area and then came to Rittner High School. Let's go to the next one. This is probably my last slide, and I'll talk a little bit about this. This is what we know as Wildwood Estates. And again, this is probably there as if you think about 1903, because of the streetcar line that was built. This is one of the things right along Lackland. You'll notice it was built by a Charles Garnett, who was, I guess, what was he? Can't remember what his predominance was, but his elaborate country estate. He later sold this to the Sella family, and the Sella family was prominent in St. Louis at that time and are still prominent in St. Louis. There's a Sella Road over in St. Louis Country Club grounds. The Sella family still owns parking structures in St. Louis. Recently, there was a man retired from Sella who had spent 35 years with them, and he was in the Business Journal. The Sella family also owns horse racing in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And if you go back to my point about Delmar Gardens and the horse racing there are things about the Sella family that were actually involved in the betting of horse racing in Delmar Gardens around the turn of the century. So it's kind of an interesting history of that. The Sella family, I did not know long before the Sella died. So anyway, that kind of started me out on this thing and got a little bit more so than just Lake Sherwood. And so I'll be happy to answer any questions or any comment, anyone wants to add to it.
I will kick in for a second, Bob. I am too young to remember the streetcar line. I will freely admit it. I remember my mom for a number of years. Mom would, and still periodically reminisces. They grew up in North City, over, well, where the flour mills are on 70 was one of their homes was demolished for the highway. But they would take the streetcar line out to Creve Coeur Park. And she would tell me that, you know, they'd leave early morning, they come back late in the day, had a ball doing it, the swimming, you know, all the stuff that went on with it. Having been overseas, like I know you have and others have, it's amazing the streetcars and whatnot that are overseas that seem to be able to handle transportation a lot better than we can do it here. That's for sure. So this was, for me, it was eye-opening. Some of the names I recognized, but had no idea where they had come from. So I appreciate the for you probably reminiscing, but for me, education.
Good.
Very interesting, Bob. I was thinking when you were talking about the streetcars and how many and all that, I had to think of Joe Edwards and how he would like to have those.
Yeah, his line probably cost more than all the 450 miles did when they built them.
Yeah.
Bob, how long have you been accumulating all this information? Because I mean, it was very interesting, and I wonder how much of this, like, because you're not involved with the Overland Historical Society,
Oh no,
are you?
no. I probably did this over a couple of week period.
Did you?
Yeah, you know, you can go in the internet and find things. Plus, there's an awful lot. If you know, I've spent a lot of time going through the digital Post-Dispatch or through the library. You can go online and look at, pull up names and do all kinds of things there. So a lot of that I got from the Post-Dispatch plus things from the internet. Probably a couple of weeks, I would think.
I see. It was very good.
Good.
I saw where the average fare on that streetcar line was 3.23 cents.
Oh, I don't doubt that. I can remember as an 11-year-old, after the streetcars were done, my neighbor next door, the boy next door to me, we used to go down and get the bus on Midland. And on Saturday mornings, we took the bus and the streetcar from Delmar Loop down to the downtown YMCA for swimming lessons. And, you know, you'd no longer let an 11-year-old ride public transportation a day than fly.
That was one of the biggest, probably the only argument we had with Allie when she lived with us is she wanted to take the bus around places because down there in her hometown, her dad owned the bus lines. So the buses were very safe, and she just could not get it through her head that not here, no, you don't, I'll take you anywhere you want to go, but you're not getting on the bus. So
I'll tell a couple of streetcar stories. When my father had a cocktail lounge at Belton Pershing, and he banked at Lindell Bank near the Sportsman's Park. So there were a couple of times he would give me his money to go put it into the bank. I'd take the streetcar, the University car to Grand Avenue and transfer them and go up north. And that's a pretty good distance. Again, a kid. Then one other time, he gave me $50 in cash to go down to the federal court building and buy his federal liquor license. So I got off the streetcar on Olive, and I had to walk over through Market. Well, in those years, Market Street was pretty desolate. I mean, there were abandoned stores, homeless people living in front of the stores, and I'm walking along there, and these two guys said, "Hey kid, you got a nickel for a cup of coffee?" And I thought, oh my God, I got $50 in my pocket. Man, I started walking faster.
And my aunt would take, I don't know where she was working at the time. She was still living in North County. If anybody remembers where River Road Shopping Center was. Right. She lived on Altonwood across the street, across Halls Ferry from there. And we were still up further north on Halls Ferry. And we would get a phone call periodically at about 6:10. And it would be my aunt calling from the Del Mar loop on the bus loop. And wherever she was coming from downtown at one time, I think she was also working at Jefferson Arms, and that might have been it. And because of the bus transfers to get to North County, they ran late and she missed it. And my dad had to go down there and pick her up and take her back home. And this was, well, we moved out of there in 76. And I remember her calling in late 60s to early 70s. So relatively recent time frame, given, modern era. But the timetables didn't mean anything. Now flip over, Jerry, to your point, when we were in Germany and we were taking the bus all over the place, when they said 12:12, they meant 12:12. They would also have a marquee up, a digital marquee, bus number, whatever, arriving, going to wherever, arriving, and it would show how many minutes. And they were pretty much exact. It was just unbelievable.
They run the train system the same way. Europe.
Yeah, I remember that when we went over with the jazz band in the summer of 2001, and that's one of the things that they said, if that train says 12:12, you better be at when the red door opens, and it's going to close at 12:12 and go. So, yeah.
Hey guys, I got to leave. We got an 8:45 pickup to go to California. So
there you go.
Good.
All right.
Have fun.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Bob.
Bob.
Good
Okay,
program,
good,
Bob.
Bob.
Okay, bye.
Thanks. All right, everybody.
Remember, no meeting next week. I mean, you can show up on Zoom. You can try to click in. There won't be a link and I won't be here, but your call.
Don't search your email thinking that you misplaced it.
I will send the weekly newsletter out with that as a reminder, and then we'll go from there. So,
All right.
righty.
Brian,
Thank you all.
Brian, I'm going to send you an email later today to help out on the